So let's talk about how to calculate slope. We already talked about there's 4 different versions, but we told you that it's a number, not just that it's a positive number or a negative number. So let's talk about how to calculate slope. For us, we're going to be talking about when you're given 2 ordered pairs, how to calculate slope. Now, you do not want to graph these. You could, to get you an idea, should it be a negative number, should it be a positive number, but it's not going to help you calculate. So if you want just to plot these points, just to get an idea of what you think it should look like, we can plot points. You should be used to now plotting points. I'm not going to number every little hash mark. You already know that each unit is 1. So if I do 3, -2, find 3, and then go down 2 units. And then find 1, and then go up 4 units from this spot. And I'll use my handy dandy red marker so that way it kind of stands out a little better. So by looking at this line, you can see this line is going downhill. So we know that our slope is going to be negative some number. So if you're a visual person and you want to graph it just to see if it's going to be a negative slope, a positive slope, maybe a slope of 0 versus undefined, you could. But on ALEKS homework, it wants you to actually calculate the actual number. So is that going to be a negative 1/3, -2, -3? Well, let's talk about how to calculate. So finding slope given 2 ordered pairs, right? So we got 2 points. What you want to do is with the ordered pairs, just label your different pieces. You know that each ordered pair has an x and a y value. So since each one has an x and a y value, just label, know which ones are your x values, which ones your y values. Because what we're going to do is we're going to use a formula to plug in those x's and y's. Now the book loves this formula. M, which we already understand is shorthand for slope, equals y2 minus y1, that goes in the numerator at the top of the fraction. And at the bottom, you have to take your x2 minus x1. Now, nothing in the book that tells us what point you have to say y from your second value versus y from your first value. So I prefer to use this formula. Just know that my y's are on top and my x's are at the bottom. And I have to see how it changed. Now, changes means difference. If I asked you how much something changed, let's say, hey, I noticed last week I weighed 250 pounds, and then this week I weighed 240 pounds, and I want to see the change. You don't add those numbers. You don't say 250 plus 240 is 490. Change means you want to subtract. So 250 minus 240 means I changed 10 pounds. So what we're going to do is just subtract my y values and then subtract my x values. Once you do that, then you're going to reduce that fraction. Okay? So I like to use this bare bones formula. The reason why is because sometimes our y's might be negative numbers or our x's might be negative numbers. When you have a lot of negatives, you might lose their signs. So if you had subtract -2 minus a -5, you would have so many negatives you might lose them. So if you just do parentheses minus parentheses, your first y and your second y, and you subtract the 2, and at the bottom your x's, then this way you're not going to lose a negative sign. Once you plug them in, once you have this formula, you're going to plug in the values. Remember, these 2 represent y's, these 2 values represent x, and then you're going to just simplify and reduce that fraction. So just remember that when you simplify, if you have a 0 on top divided by a number, that's how we're going to get the slope of 0. But if you have a number and a 0 at the bottom, that's how we get the other type, the undefined. If you put it in your calculator, 8 divided by 0, you're going to get an error message. It'll tell you cannot divide by 0. So that's how we get undefined, and this is how we get zeros, and then the rest, you're going to get an actual number value. So now that we went over this, let's take a look at this. We said this is one ordered pair, this is your second ordered pair. So the first step it says is label the parts given. So we know that this is an x, this is a y, because every ordered pair has an x and a y. X and a y. Now that I know which values are x and which ones are y, I know that I have to subtract my y's on top and then subtract my x's at the bottom. So for me, I'm going to use the bare bones formula. I'm just going to say, I know that I'm going to have to subtract 2 numbers on top. So I write out the formula, parentheses minus parentheses, parentheses minus parentheses. And remember, y's go on top, x's go on the bottom. So now let's plug them in. Now, if you do what the book says y2 minus y1. So you have to figure out what ordered pair is your first order pair versus your second order pair. So sometimes the book will call this the second ordered pair and this one the first order pair. So a lot of times you might see the book say, let's do 4 and a -2. You don't have to do that way. It doesn't matter if this is your first ordered pair or if this is your second ordered pair. Because if I gave you a graph instead of writing it out and I gave you this picture, who would have said that this is your first ordered pair? Or maybe is this one your second ordered pair? You can't tell when it's on a graph. So all I tell people is this. We just know that you have to subtract your y's. Make sure you're just going in the same direction. So ask yourself, normally I read going from left to right. So notice I started at a -2 and I changed it to a 4. So I started as a -2, so I put that in the first parentheses, and I changed, that's why it's subtraction, to a 4. Now let's see how our x's change. Remember, we have to go in the same direction. So if I went from here to here, I'm going to do the same thing for x's. So let's see, I started as a 3, and I changed to a 1. Remember, x's go down here. Started as a 3, changed, that's why it's subtraction, and I ended up as a 1. Once you plug this in, now you're going to simplify. How do you simplify? We talked about this multiple times. To simplify, we always remove parentheses first. Then we collect. So if I slip in little imaginary 1s, because you don't see any number in front of the parentheses, 1 times -2 is -2. -1 times a +4 is now -4. At the bottom, 1 times 3 is 3. -1 times 1 is -1. Now that I don't have any parentheses, collect any like terms. Top was top. So let's do the 2 numerators. This is a negative, this is a negative. So when you have 2 negatives, you add, and team negative wins. If I collect my bottoms, I have a 3 and a -1. You know we're going to subtract to get 2. We know team 3 wins. And then finally, once you simplify, see if you can reduce the fraction. And you know that -6 divided by a +2, you can reduce this to find that our slope is -3. By the picture, it makes sense because we told you the picture is going downhill. It makes sense that our slope is going to go negative. So how to figure out slope is just remember it's the change in y's on top over the change in x's. And just remember, pick a direction. The book goes in this direction. I go in this direction. It doesn't matter. Just see where your y's are, plug them in. See your x's, plug them in, and then simplify and reduce.